Welcome to Dad Pod. I'm Mike.
And I'm Luke. We're friends here in Madison, and we both have kids. And at least for us, becoming a dad has been transformational. We talk to all sorts of dads in all sorts of situations to learn from their unique challenges, lessons, and evolutions. The goal is simple: learn from each other to become better dads.
If you dig it, please find us on Apple or Spotify and click follow. That single click helps put us in front of more dads, which Luke would really appreciate.
Hi, everybody. This is Luke and Mike here, and we're very excited for today's discussion with our guest, Izaz. Our first topic, we'll be discussing what it's like to raise kids in America as an immigrant, where your cultural context might be different than that of your kids. Then we're going to discuss what it's like to raise a family with a strong faith-based approach. And finally, we're going to talk about community and different strategies to build community around your family. As a reminder, no one here, is pretending to be an expert. We are practitioners, just like everybody else, working every day to try and be better dads. So with that, I am so excited to introduce Izaz to you all. Izaz was born in Bangladesh and immigrated to the U.S. as a young child, where he lived in New York City. He is a true entrepreneur, the type of entrepreneur that can't stop starting businesses. At different points in his life, Izaz has run a real estate business, a contracting business, a photography business, a student exchange organization, and the list goes on. Today, Izaz lives with his family, his incredible wife, who can dunk literally and intellectually on any of us, his 3 beautiful children, all in community outside of Atlanta. And I know I'm late, but Ramadan Mubarak, my friend. I hope you and your family had a wonderful Ramadan. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's truly an honor to be here with you. I'm just so excited to see both of your faces after all these years. So it's truly a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's jump in. So we like to start a lot of our discussions in this way, which is to describe your overall dad strategy. You know, what are the top 3 to 5 priorities you think about when it comes to how you want to be a dad to your kids?
Great question. You know me from a different time frame as a college student and recent graduate and trying to figure things out, newlywed. But I think before I had kids, there has been a transformation for me, and the transformation has been a spiritual one. And in terms of not knowing and going into the deep end, it's truly, that's how I feel. So I had to really recenter myself in terms of what are important. And I went in like one would with a startup and not knowing anything other than the idea of what you want. And I just went for the big picture, those values. So I went back to the faith tradition of Islam. I'm a Muslim, obviously, and what those values are. And we went kind of deep dive into the Prophet Muhammad and his way of raising children and being a father and what that meant. And, you know, all the prophets we know of any faith, they were very busy people, right? They had a lot going on. As a story, if you don't believe in terms of the prophethood as a storyline, these men were very busy. I took from that, and I tried to be present with my kids as much as I could, traveling all the time and having a lot of hobbies. So I tried to incorporate my kids into my daily routine as much as possible. And the other thing that's not connected to faith, but I tried to partner with my wife as much as possible to lean on her and get that perspective. And she has been truly an amazing support system for me in my spiritual development. Just being in the space with me and interacting with her. And it's still an evolution, obviously, but I just go back to how would the Prophet Muhammad, how would he react to something? And most of the time, I don't get to that process, but I'm always trying to correct myself and kind of trying my best to align with that perspective.
Would you mind talking about, you referenced some of the specific values. Would you mind talking about what some of those values are and maybe how you express them?
Sure. In terms of values, the things that are very important to me is obviously the religious value, but within that, kindness, being generous, and being present. Those are the three things I try to teach my kids. And how to do that is I truly struggle with the being present piece because I've always had like so much going on in my brain, and my kids have a totally tangent way of thinking about other things. So it's really spending time with them and kind of saying, look, I'm struggling with this. This is how I want to be. This is what I want to do. I want you to partner with me and I want you to practice with me. So like it all comes down to, maybe it's a very obtuse way of looking at it. I just look at like tasks in front of me and what is important fundamentally for the kids. And my whole thing is, and maybe because I'm really new to it, has been the screen of the religion screen and kind of taking it through that. Because the rest, as you said, Luke, we're all practitioners. We don't really know, but we do know there are like some real challenges out there, and we need to be anchored to something. And I think me being so new at this, it's to anchor to the faith and then using that to kind of dictate. So in terms of specific values, other than that, I feel like there's so many values, right? And it can all evolve from different things. It could be, values that your parents taught you, values them. So for me, I guess what is not, I'm even bypassing parents in some ways. I'm going back to the religious because
Yeah.
my parents they have their challenges, and they were immigrants, and wanted to do a lot of things they couldn't, but they did their best. And so I'm trying to kind of bypass that and relearn through through that.
Could you talk about that a little bit more, just in terms of, did having kids adjust your viewpoint on your parents' experience? And, obviously being immigrants has got to be incredibly hard, and it could go well, it could go poorly. I don't know kind of what your original viewpoint on it was, but now you have kids. Now you're trying to apply your own screen and values to that situation. Do you now look back with a different viewpoint on what they were trying to do with you?
I definitely have more gratitude and more sympathy. My parents, to their credit, they didn't hide the struggle, but they also, at the same time, while they were struggling through different aspects of being in America and raising children, they had this, I guess, a vision of what family looked like, and they were very protective in that way. So it was, I personally always appreciated that. So like, for example, my mom, she still to this day, doesn't speak English well, but she really understood that the space that I was growing up in is totally foreign to her. And she kind of talked about those high level values that I think she also drew from her religious background. But then she gave me a lot of space to kind of explore. So she told me what I shouldn't be, thinking about or trying to do, but she didn't say, you got to be home all the time. So I was able to go to the movies. I was able to hang out with people. I was able to go do all the stuff with ISEC, even as an older person, but still within some of oversight from parents, right? In college, you still, especially as an immigrant family, even college, you have your parents have influence. Mm-hmm. So she definitely gave me that, and my dad was supportive of it. So I think it's a big deal, because now I catch myself as, I try to overparent, meaning I try to put too many constraints. But I think what she did is profound, right? Because she kind of gave me the credit and the ability and the space to explore and, from the entrepreneurship standpoint, tinker a little bit and then maybe make some mistakes and then grow from it. I think it really had a really overall, the current standpoint in terms of when I'm dead, I don't know if it was positive or negative. But now, at this point in time, I think it's a very positive impact. And in terms of gratitude, I think, like I was telling Luke when we spoke initially, like my dad, he was more of a quiet person in the background, meaning he was working many hours. And so even with that, I guess his care and the love that he had, he showed it differently. And at the time, I think as men or boys with fathers, there's always some natural, I don't want to say misunderstanding. It's just that we're trying to get a better perspective of each other, and as we're growing. And but now looking back, I think there's a lot more gratitude with my dad because he did all his work. I mean, whatever he had to do to financially provide, and then he supported us in many ways that now I'm like, are you kidding me? Like I would kind of die if I had to do that. So the example I shared with Luke is he worked until 8 and 10 at night. And then he would sit with us, especially my older brother and sister, and went through their homework. And he didn't speak English well, and they were new. They didn't speak English well. So it didn't go well. But they were up until 4 or 5 in the morning. And then, he would have to sleep an hour or so and then wake up and take us to school. And then he would have work. So, I mean, he did that for, I know, at least for a year and a half or 2 years in some level. Like I caught on the English language pretty quickly. I was much younger than my siblings, but they had a tough time. And he was the one who had to support that. I mean, now I just have a hard time. Remember with my oldest, Alia, just waking up at night to just feed her a bottle prepared by my wife. I remember thinking back, it was truly a battle for me. So a total gratitude is how I feel, and just so lucky to have come in this and religiously. It's interesting in Islam. We have no choice in a few things in terms of when we are in which family we're born and when we die. And it is truly the divine plan in terms of those things. Everything else, we have a choice. Mm. Us being friends and after 10 years and connecting this way, it's a choice in terms of, but those things aren't. And it's really a humbling thing to know that these parents were chosen for you. And the time of death is also preordained, I guess. So. Mm-hmm. Sorry, it's a very long-winded long way home, as they say.
What did I say earlier? Some things never change.
Yeah.
One of the things listening to your story, it really piqued my interest, was thinking about you as an entrepreneur. Where do you think that comes from? Where do you think that drive or that curiosity or that creativity or that maybe that risk tolerance comes from when you look back at how you were raised?
I think, with entrepreneurship, if you look at the immigrant scenario in the US, there's two things. One is the lack of access, and the other is not knowing. So if you see more, the most successful entrepreneurs, they typically are not the most grounded in the facts or knowing the rules or the structures, because then your risk tolerance become much less because you kind of know all the angles and all the issues and the problems. So for me, my family and the people I knew, they had to kind of do things on their own because they weren't really highly educated, that generation. But to the credit, like very similar to other immigrant families, like all my siblings are attorneys or engineers or doctors, extended family, everyone is very successful educationally, but that challenge of not having access to, you just don't have any other options but to try something on your own. And the risk tolerance is that, I think truly, I'm being very honest, is that just not knowing enough.
You can't break rules that you don't know about.
Sorry?
You can't break the rules you don't know about.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So I think, and that's the thing with entrepreneurship, is that as you learn, as you grow, as you understand different industries or different types of things, you have to continue to get to the unknown. Because if you don't, you get stuck because you're like, okay, I'm a tech guy. I already know all these things. And like, I'm trying to create another tech company. It's tough because you kind of see all the pitfalls and the issues and kind of limits you. So I think my analysis or thought process now where I'm at today is the difference is trying to try different things. So how to capture the skill sets you have and to kind of leverage them in different spaces. But there is a sense of unknown, and that is also interesting and exciting. I think if we do that, I think we can be more successful.
Is that something that you try to pass on to your kids? I'm curious how you think about that, because I think if you're an entrepreneur, it's very common that I've observed, you want to pass on this go get 'em entrepreneur attitude to your kids. And you also see it with, if you're well educated, you want your kids to be well educated. And I don't know if that is like, is it good? I don't know. It worked out for me, but will it work out for them? Like, not if that doesn't fit with their thing. I'm just curious how you think about having gone through your entrepreneur experience and your immigrant experience, looking at your parents, and now you're looking forward at your kids and their path, and how you think about what you're passing on to them of those things.
I think that's a really good question, Mike. I mean, I'm kind of amazed at how clear that was. But God bless you, man. That's
Thank
a really
you.
good question. I think for me, like, I don't really get into that level of detail. Like, my thing is more of the spiritual side, getting those values that we talked about. And in terms of like how they participate in this world, I care, but I don't really care if they become entrepreneurs or if they are a teacher, have structure, and they have 2 months off and that's what they like. But it's very interesting that, my parents had that pressure, like in terms of, you have to be successful, you have to make it, so that there was that pressure. But I think not having that pressure or not providing that pressure to my kids, it's really interesting. I really enjoy like to see how they're so different. So like my oldest, she's very entrepreneurial on her own. She has like a business already. She sells things, she makes things, she's at fairs, like pushing her product, like to see that and to support it, it's like really great. And there's causes that she cares about, and she's thinking about how can she do her business to support. Like during the month of Ramadan, for example, she raised through selling her things close to like maybe $5,000-6,000. She's
Wow.
9.
Wow.
So I feel really proud, but I connect with like she saw that there was a cause that she wanted to support, and that's connected to her value of like being generous and seeing that her tool that she has of being creative as a way to achieve, that value, right? That's how I see it. And my middle daughter, she's really into nothing like that. She's into fashion. She's into like dressing up, and she's younger. She's like 7. So there isn't, I don't, in terms of what she wants to do, it's more, I guess, she wants to live at home forever. She doesn't have that yet. And it's okay, because in terms of development, I found that every child is different. And one thing, I don't know, you mentioned I have 3 kids. We adopted a boy from Morocco. So we have recently. I don't know, Luke, if I mentioned
Mm.
that to you,
Mm-mm.
but so we have Missy and I, we adopted a boy from Morocco, and he came with us about two and a half months ago. So we have a
Wow.
house of 4 kids now, and he's 9 months old. And
Wow.
the whole process of that is a total, I mean, amazing, transformative. It's similar to my experience in Egypt in ISEG, how it changed my life.
Mm.
And this experience was like, I would say, in terms of the span, how I would think this was another experience that really reshifted focus.
There's a couple things you've mentioned that poke at some stuff that I've been thinking about recently. And one of those is just the idea of being super present over anything else. And in some of the conversations, many of the conversations that we've had so far with other dads, and also just in various conversations I've been a part of, listening to people talk about their own experience with their father, they really, the stuff they talk about is like just doing whatever, like with their dad or with their parents, or, and it's really just, they talk about just when their dad was like present with them. Like, and none of the other details tend to really matter that much. And I've been thinking about how it's easy to get caught up in your some tactical style of parenting, or what is, you know, what is your approach going to be, or what should I be pushing them toward activities or holding them back from activities. And it's like just be around. And then second that you've talked about was be reactionary to, like, how can I take the second, let them take the first step, and then I'll help them with the second step toward whatever their interests are. And don't have a plan. Let them set the course. And that's not easy, especially today. And especially if you're in any type of professional environment, any type of where people are talking about what camp to do, or, you know, all this different stuff starting at crazy ages. It's like be present and be reactionary.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Man, I'm connecting with your framing so well. I'm gelling with it, man. This is amazing. I think you're right. With the first piece, I personally struggle with it a lot, and this is where because I know it has to happen in terms of being present, and then, but I lean on my wife a lot to kind of hold me accountable to that, because I think I have a lot of things going on. I'm like involved in a lot of things in our local community, and I travel for work to New York, and I've been doing it for some time. It's been a while. And so how am I present? And for me, it's not the, I know it's not the ideal solution. And what I do is I bring my kids along with me to the things that I have to do, like my obligations. So they're super involved with civic engagement, some community service types of things with our local mosque or masjid in our area. And I got into running. I don't know if you guys even know this. I've done like marathons before kids, and so now I'm getting back into it, where like I take my younger kids out when I'm running in the park or something like that, into hunting, fishing. So my oldest daughter, she's really into fishing. So it's like things I like to do, I connect with. So I bring them along with those types of activities. But I think in terms of the second piece, the reactionary piece, I think you're absolutely right. But I was recently, I'm dealing with something, not personally, but in terms of crisis management. If you really think about not being right, or not being first to market, or not having the first word, if you really think about managing a crisis, it's kind of good to have a plan, but then react, because you don't want to do too much. You don't want to overcommit to anything. And with kids, it's like a blessing from God. I feel like is that connection that I just have been recently dealing with. It's so true, because the kids are, you don't want to mess it up. If anything that you don't want to mess up is the how you raise your kids. And if you are over engineering it, I think you're making a lot of assumptions about things that may not be at all true. And I mean, the fallout from that, it could be disastrous. And maybe you're not going to be even present because they already pushed you out of the scene. So I think you're absolutely right. And I can do that because my wife is more tempered. So I don't feel like it's me alone. So like that, having that support system for me as a husband, to know that my wife is there and present and she brings a lot of value to it. So I don't have that stress, that anxiety that kind of pushes us to that. I think for me, that's how I would characterize it.
Yeah. Did you have to take yourself through, like walk yourself through any type of mental, I'll say mental gymnastics, but you want to be present, but you're also traveling a bunch. How did you reconcile that?
That's a good question. So I used to travel a lot. So I think the plan was to kind of lower the amount of travel. So over time, it became much less. A second is when I'm here, like try to do a lot of things with them. So it's a balance of, you're saying, like, suburban life, it has its perks and it has its constraints. So like, there's a lot of programming, there's a lot of after school stuff, there's a lot of things in the summer. So the way we connected with just, like what the kids' passions are, and kind of connected like one or two things. Let's kind of deep dive into them, see if you love it. And if you don't, let's try something else. So not doing like a bunch of things, not, being like a bus driver, from one thing to the next. But a lot of people do that. And like I said, in terms of connecting, I try to bring my kids along to all the things I kind of do when I'm in town. So maybe hanging. So we have like, you guys know, you've been to the Middle East. So like, morning prayer is very early, right? Fajr prayer is very early. So sometimes I take my kids with me on the weekend. So we pray, but then other kids, some of the other guys, they bring their kids and we have coffee after and we talk about different things, and the kids get to play and they're building relationships. They're seeing their dads with other figures that are dad like uncles, and they kind of understand that their support network is bigger than that. And I think that really, in terms of going back to like how I was brought up, I had that, but with family members. But I think in the U.S. construct, you typically don't have that, and it actually takes away a lot away from the kids' development and how they see the world. And I think so things like that. Like I said, all the activities that I do, I bring them along with me, and I think they appreciate it. But I'm told by some of these older guys who have older kids is saying, when they hit that pre-teen and teen, they're not going to want to come with you. But I'm hoping because of the time we spend together, this is where I have to kind of pivot now. Their interests and them, what they want to do, they will drive that. And I have to kind of change my schedule, where me wanting to go fishing on a random Saturday, I think it will have to change to if they want to do like an art fair or if they want to do something else. But so I think that's a lot of work for me coming up, and I see that. So now I'm trying to work on how to recalibrate. So it's going to be a drastic change for me.
You hinted at this. I'd love to hear more detail, but you were born in Bangladesh, immigrated to New York City, and now live in Atlanta. I'd love to hear you talk about what was your childhood like in ways that are different than what your kids are experiencing today, and then what's it like for you to reconcile that difference?
I think the search, the moving or relocating or doing all of that it was in search of creating a similar atmosphere for my kids that I had growing up. So when I was in Bangladesh, I had this sense of community. I had this generous, uplifting environment, or at least from my perspective, I felt truly held by the people around me. And that was really amazing. So even when I transferred to the US in New York City in Bed-Stuy in the 90s, where it's not anything like it's today, we had to, we kind of pulled from that experience back in Bangladesh. But then I saw the other way where I was truly alone, meaning it was just me and my parents and my siblings, and it was a traumatic, right? Not to, I can't find a different word, but it was a process that we had to reconcile. And in terms of reconciliation, it wasn't like this is normal. It was always like there has to be something better because I've seen something else, experienced something else. Obviously, there's opportunity that isn't there, but so I was always searching for that. So like ISEC was interpretation of what that family and being held and supported was like. And I felt that and I gave everything I had to that for that period of time. And so for the kids, there's some more parameters, right? They have to have a safe environment. They have to feel comfortable. They're obviously Muslim growing up in America. This is post 9/11, and there's like a lot of other things that has happened. So how do you reconcile? So my wife is from this area. We visited quite often before, and we found a community that had people who kind of, I guess, ended up where we are now, immigrant or non, born here, kind of understanding the value of family and giving it its due. In some other cities, maybe because of the realities and it's more of a hustle type of environment. We have, in terms of family and value, family might be different. I don't know, but in New York City, I felt it is a little different. So, moving here was exodus to kind of search for that I think it parallels with my spiritual journey, connected with a kind of finding or hoping to find a refuge for this way of thinking and being and growing a family.
When you look at ending up where you are in the Atlanta area, did you decide at first, let's find our place and then identify the Atlanta area as it? Or was it going there realizing, hey, this might be where we want to land? I'm curious, like the order that happened in, because one of the other things that's emerged in these conversations so far is how important community is, and how in America we can end up in having no community, especially dads, especially men, as they enter this stage of life. And like what made sense, like we were having a family in a place where it like made sense maybe professionally to be, and now we're entering this family context where it might make no sense to be. So I'm curious I want to dig into this a little bit because it's like so clearly a important topic that many of us might luck out, and many of us aren't prepared for.
I think this is where like the belief or the faith or the intentionality plays such a big role. Like in my heart, I was searching for this safe haven, and obviously we had some experience with Atlanta, but I was truly trying to figure out like how can I be that, like the way you talked about as a dad, not having the support that I need and what my kids would need based on my assumptions about that and what my wife will need. And so my intention, I think it was the purest that I've ever had it for anything, that I needed to find this space. In terms of Atlanta being the home, I mean, we had some investments here, that we had property here that we rented out from before. And so when we came and we found some, some remnants of that feeling like there's this culture or community, we wanted to just try it. So it was really a trial to see, like before the kids really needed to even go to school, to say, hey, let's try it for a year or two. And if it doesn't work, like we have New York to fall back on. It's not a bad place to fall back. I mean, I grew up there and Missy worked there for a long time. So we tried it, and I truly believe there's like the connection and the spiritual part of it is everything kind of easily fell into place. In the Islamic faith tradition, there is this prayer. I don't want to go in too much into detail, but if there's a big decision you make, there's a prayer that you do, which is similar to the regular prayer, but then there's this ask you have. It's like to God saying, "Hey, I want to make this decision. I don't know if it's good for me, but if it is good for my current circumstance, my reality, and the life after this, make it easy for me. But if it's not, make it difficult, make it a distant thing." And this is called the istikhara prayer if you want to look into it. But everything about moving to Atlanta is going back. Obviously there was challenges in terms of leaving your home, but everything was very smooth. Like the people we met and how we did things. It was truly a divine intervention from my perspective, I felt like. But we were, in terms of linear thinking as human beings and making choices and decisions, it was practical in the sense we had somewhere to live here. We just have to, and we tried it. We were open to other places, but it had to be somewhere close to New York in terms of flying back and forth. But it started with this intentionality of trying to find this space. And I was very lucky that it worked out in the first place we came to.
You big Delta flyer?
Yeah, I'm a unfortunately, fortunately.
What kind of segue is that after that heartfelt, spiritually defining answer? Talk about a segue, Williams.
But I love it, man. Now he's like crack. When you kind of spin off of it, you kind of don't know what you're missing. And now, just give me some of that. Give me some more, as they say.
Diamond status. It's a real thing. One of the things one of the things you mentioned here is obviously partnering with Missy and the decision to move to Atlanta. What was it like going through the experience of having Missy convert to Islam? How did that conversation? And I ask this because it feels similarly connected to a place, a community, a kind of foundation for a family. But could you maybe talk about how did the two of you together arrive at that decision? And what was it like to go through that?
Man, this part of it we might have to look at later. This part of it. But no, I think I'm just
That's
kidding.
Totally cool.
So Missy and I were very pragmatic in terms of starting journey together, getting married and stuff. It was very, because we connected on deeper level about life and all of that. But then before the idea of getting married, it was very contractual, but not in the sense like we went really deep into like values, what we wanted, like real things. Like if you now go back to like pastors or others that are supporting couples getting married, we really ask those deep questions, like things that are fundamental. And if they change over time, and it can, but if there's a likelihood of change, it could totally spin out of control. So we had those conversations early on, tough conversations. And I think we got to a point where, she also had a lot of exposure to the faith in her travels, and she reconciled between that and also our relationship. And she made a decision that obviously she doesn't know a lot about it, but what she knows, it's positive, and she was willing to take that leap of faith, if you will. And also like what are my parameters? which was tough, at the time. As a man, as you said, as fathers, we don't have space, but I think as men also in the social and finding a mate, partner, life partner, that marketplace, if you call it a marketplace, in terms of things that we have to offer relative to the other party, it's limited. So like I had to really create some ideals, some values that I wasn't willing to negotiate. And there was a lot of others I was willing to kind of be like, I'm okay with everything. Like if you think about then, when you guys knew me then, it was more like, I mean, no one thought like, Izaz was going to marry someone who's not from similar background or anything, because there's typically people do that. Even more educated, more Americanized, you see people tend to. So my thing was fundamentally spiritually and also principle level. If I could connect to someone, I was willing to kind of let go of all the other stuff, all the baggage or dogmatic things. And I think Missy appreciated that because she never thought that this was even a possibility. So I think we came at it that way. I think we both saw that there's a trust in each other, and also there's a ability to partner. And we both didn't have anything. I think the financially not having much at the time really made it like basically one variable was zero and you could shelve it, right? Because if you come at different things, it becomes more difficult to kind of reconcile. And then, going through it, initially our marriage, it was difficult with external parties, meaning family and folks that knew us individually. But once we got married, we really, I think, leaned on each other. And we had good practice because pre-marriage, we kind of made ourselves go through that. And it was not by design. It was just from the sheer stress of it, because I was seeing it from a perspective of it's totally a departure from anyone's expectation, right? And then now how do I do that? So I had to go through this strategic change process, which I had experience with in a different way. So like I remember like I had to like have these like types of conversations with different people and like kind of implant these things. And people came to this realization on their own. I was hoping for it, but I wasn't an expert in it. But like my mom, my dad, siblings, and part of it, I knew that I would have to, once we have a kid, it was going to kind of bring everything, all those sensors you implanted over the year or two, it would come to life. And then during that process, it took longer than expected to get pregnant. So I think that was another thing we had to work through. And that's when the idea of, potentially even adopting came into our conversation early on in our marriage. So anyways, but going back to this point, we just leaned on each other, and by the things we had to deal with, we just established a very strong partnership, a strong relationship, and we could talk about very difficult things.
Were there any specific practices that you used to do that? Like if I want to have that conversation with my spouse, what recommendations would you give me?
So, I mean, depending on the type of, like, if it's like a life-changing thing, what I did was like have really clear conversations, and it's sitting down together and say, look, we need to talk about different things, and these are the things I want to talk about, and these are the points that I want to get through. So, because I'm not, as you know, very detailed, clear, list oriented. I became that way because my wife is. So I had to kind of mirror the way she receives information. So I had to itemize things, I had to list, and then I had to kind of frame it properly, because sometimes, language, what you say is not important, how you say it. And, typically men and women have a different way of talking. So I would write a lot of notes So I would write handwritten notes about either pre-conversation and definitely post-conversation, because conversations would get difficult and maybe there were things that were misunderstood. So I would always write a letter or a note and a card and to say, look, this is what I was trying to say. Some things maybe were not clear or not the way I wanted it to be articulated. And I think she always appreciated that. So I think knowing your partner and what things they value is important. But listen, I mean, we typically don't have like big conversations other than the things that are fundamental things, because I truly trust her with everything else as long as we are aligned on the big things. That's always been how we operated. And I think every relationship is different. How relationships start and form are different. And I think that will kind of dictate, how those relationships are built. But honesty and sincerity are, I think, key ingredients.
I wanted to go back to the beginning of this question and ask you, how did you convince yourself that you needed to narrow down to a core set of values and shed everything else? Like, how did you get to that point of view? Because I imagine, you were saying this goes in the face of a lot of convention, a ton of expectation. How did you get there?
I mean, I think I was always and that's like, I think I'm blessed to be very resolute in terms of knowing what I wanted in life. I think I was always that way. In terms of how to get there, didn't know that, but I always knew what I wanted. So when I met Missy, I knew that in terms of a life partner, this is the person in terms of what and I knew that in order for that to work, I had to go through that exercise of, okay, culturally you're brought up, there's like the Indo-Pac influence, and then there's a religious. What is more important? So for me, the religion was more important. So I had to shed everything else. And then within the religion, there's that. And then what is true to the religion? Are there any? So then I had to shed that because I didn't want because I knew my partner, my wife, future wife is a smart person. It has to pass the smell test, right? So what you're saying that this is what we want to do, this is what life is like. So I had to kind of cut through all of that, and I knew that to be true. And I think it was I think, and you caught it. It was a very important decision, and the process exercise that I went through. I think that was very helpful because if I didn't, I mean, it could have been disastrous, right? Expecting you do all these other things that are not really important.
You've talked about, in a couple of different ways here, you've talked about a clear and compelling vision for the community within which you want to raise your kids. So talk to us a little bit about that. What's your community today? How did you figure out who's a part of it? What are some of the tangible ways that you support one another? And then the last thing, what's the vision or parts of the vision of how as a community you see yourselves having impact more broadly?
In terms of our community, I think the most important thing is, like we talked about this, your spouse and having a clear understanding. And then for us, it was being centered around a place of worship, because we knew that Missy and I were very busy. We both work. We have 4 kids now. We couldn't really do multiple things. It had to kind of go through an incubator, if you will, right? One source. And then from that, you can kind of figure out different avenues of interacting. So we chose intentionally to make the masjid or the mosque that space. And through that, we met people. So there was a screen, obviously, people who had similar understanding of the faith. And obviously within that, you had to kind of screen through people who had different differences. So we're very thoughtful about that. And as we were building that, it was then we connected with people, like starting to connect. So as you know, like I was kind of missing for a long time, right? Because I had to kind of go through that change in order to get married to Missy and then move through, and then the religious transformation. And so I am at a place where I have a good foundation, I guess, for the religious platform I needed for me, my wife, and my kids. But then it's like, how do I now re engage other people that are not maybe Muslim, but we share values? Like, so for me, I knew for myself how I am. The change for me happens drastically because that's my affinity. Like I can shut off, I can turn on really quickly, but when I'm off, I'm off. So because of that, I knew that about myself. And so in terms of community, how we come together, it's really around the kids right now in terms of what they want to do, their interests. So, Missy runs the Girl Scouts through the masjid for a group of 12 little girls at different ages. Two of my older kids, they're both in Girl Scouts, for example. So it's through the masjid. And she has a group of women, mothers that are participating in it. And, Missy, she's leading that and connecting. And they're doing so much work. They're doing activities. This coming weekend, we're doing a camping trip actually through that, and opened it up to the larger community where we are all going for the weekend on the lake and spending time together, doing some team building stuff, having the spiritual component. We invited some people that are not Muslim but are connected to our network here, just to build bridge. Because the true fundamental belief that I have is that when you cut through the stuff and you build the relationship with someone, you really give them the benefit of the doubt, and you also want to see their perspective. So even if there are differences, you take it to the side, like I said, with the variables that are zero. Even if they're not, you say, okay, but we connect. But in order to do that, so my whole mission now is to, how do I implement that on, for me, and Missy's already advanced in that, she can do that, but for me to do that, and then my kids to see, how do we partner, how do we coexist. But in order to do that, you have to know yourself first. And I think, as an identity, as a Muslim, as an American, what does that mean? It couldn't be confusing. So now the focus is, how do you re-engage. And one key learning that I want to share is, like, when we were talking initially, Luke, when you come and you have this great vision, or have a vision that you want to see articulated, and you have remnants of success, you kind of idolize that, because you're like I was just in the conversation, how this is perfect or this is amazing. But I think, knowing that it is also reality, things will go wrong. Some things will not work. Some relationships, for me, that's something that I had to catch myself on, right? Because the idea can't really go away just because something goes wrong. Because that the idea is still good, but just because you have a bad experience, it shouldn't be a deterrent. So that's what I'm working on. Is we're doing all different activities. Like, there's the guys group here, so we did a trip to Colorado, just guys, fathers. We hung out for the weekend and talked about different things, did exercises, went hiking. And so I'm proactively doing those things for the group. And then, meeting younger people, very successful and smart. Like, one of these guys are like, I'm not saying McKinsey is a thing, but that's a way to understand, you know, went there, but then now he's like, much younger than us, in his late mid 20s, but he's thinking about marriage, and he's like very connected to that idea that we were talking about, and he's thinking about kids and all of that, and he's running with different programs that we can do in our community. So we're just trying to expand the network and really be meaningfully involved in each other's lives, and that's yeah.
There's something you mentioned that I really like, in that if I think it's easy to miss out on if church or or a mosque or something like that is not a part of your life, which is using a screen, basically screening and filtering what people and activities are in your life, and using a place of faith or a place of worship as a starting point for that is an incredible resource that a life of faith provides. And that I also think a lot of people, like, I don't have that. I'm somewhere in the, agnostic to atheist to whatever spectrum. My view on faith has softened a lot with some of the wisdom of more winters. And I'm just thinking about how people can use that idea. Like, what are the things that are important to filter on in your life? We've landed on the pretty neat community here in Madison that I daily have my own gratitude for. I lucked into that. I did a little bit proactively, but I really lucked into that. And I just want to ultimately flag this idea of, to me, that's an incredible way to think about life, is what am I screening through? The people, and what are the things that I really want to be proactive about in making, in those decisions.
I think there's a profound calmness that comes to oneself when you know that you're not in control of the outcome. So I think religion, any faith tradition, Christianity, Judaism, Sikhism, any ism, I think that fundamental value, I think, is there in some form. I think in Islam, it's one of the biggest principles is that you have your intention, you check your intention, and you do whatever you can. Like you said, you did some things, but the luck factor from the religious perspective is that was by design, right? So to kind of, as a person who's constantly thinking, like I am and you are and Luke and others, to kind of leave that piece in terms of the outcome to not yourself, in terms of going after the result. And even as an entrepreneur, going back to that point, I think it's a critical misstep entrepreneurs have, is when they're trying to control the outcome. You have the idea, formulation, and effort, and you got to bust your butt on the effort piece. Yes, you got to do that. But the outcome and the beauty of the religion, I think that framework, it transcends your control, but then it's a shared experience. And if you're Christian, you have a shared experience with others who feel that way. And even if you don't believe, like I don't believe all the doctrines of Christianity, but I, as an outsider, can say, well, there is this sense of intentionality and this collective experience, shared experience that really supports that. So I think religious, that framing, it really takes it away, the power away from you. And I think as humans, psychologically, lack of choice, it actually becomes an empowering tool, because the more choices you have, the more options you tend to have. I think it freezes you, because if you have like 100 options in picking condiments at a restaurant, very rarely you know what you want. You kind of go through everything, you get confused. So I think having some framework, I think we're made that way, where we need some type of direction.
What have you learned having now? It sounds like you put a lot of effort yourself into arranging events with other people in your community. It sounds like Missy does the same. You're proactively putting yourselves out there, creating opportunities for engagement between yourself and others, and between others and others. Some people might be nervous to put themselves out there, or especially men as we get older. It's the narrative, at least, would have you believe that it gets harder and harder to meet new friends. that you choose. What have you learned so far? And what would you say to people who might just be starting, hey, they're listening to this. I want to start more proactively building my own community. I'm just kind of curious, like what you've taken away from your experience in that regard.
It's interesting. I think like when I moved to a new place, like a change in your life, it kind of shakes you in the sense that your assumptions are not the same. So I think in order to be able to be open to building relationships, and not everyone is extrovert and people are introverted, and we connect with people differently, and keeping all that in context, I think we are less prone to building meaningful relationships is because our rigid framing, like we kind of already know things. When we feel like we know everything, we know how we want to live, and this is a one way to get to this outcome and it's already defined. I think when the operations of how to get there, if you're too connected to that, I think that's what limits us in being open to building new relationships. So like for me, I knew the principles, like what I wanted is connected to my faith, but I didn't care if the guy that I connected with was 55 years old or 65 or he was 22, because I cared about that. I think I was open to that because I had a real need for that connection. And I also was open because of my need that it doesn't have to be someone who is going through the same thing in terms of age, demographic, types of work that we do. So some of my very good friends have kids in college that I connect with because fundamentally, vision wise, we're very aligned in terms of how we see ourselves, how we see community. But I would say that though, you bring it up because it is very rare. Because so it's not easy, I don't think. But most of the time, I think it's easiest when you change your environment because you have to force yourself. So like I wanted to change my environment. So I was proactive about that, knowing myself and, travel, like I said, when we were in a new place, like how did we experience things? It was very alive. Like we felt like we're so connected because we were just experiencing everything for the first time. And I just needed to do that. And once I did it, like all of that stuff was more reactionary. But now thinking back, I would say this is why it happened that way, from our perspective. But I always, my caveat is, it was designed as God is ultimate planner, and it comes into fruition in the way it's supposed to.
Well, I think it's incredible how far you can get when you know what your values are, you have those out front, and you take a little bit of action to try to connect on that level. I mean, I have so many checks in the positive column of if I just take a half a step first myself, the reaction that I get from others is like so incredibly positive. Like people are thirsting, I think, and I've said this a few times, but I think men in particular, in my background, I carry a lot of baggage about like connecting emotionally with other men. I have all this just from being, diddly dunk middle schoolers and high schoolers and everything. You get made fun of if you show emotion or like sadness or weakness or whatever. And now the reaction is so positive when you try to do it. At least in my experience, like when I have tried to do it, way more often than not, it has been so positive.
And I think to take that, the other side of that, it's like, what's the downside? Right? To your point around baggage, right? Like we learned all these behaviors because getting made fun of in middle school was like an experience of death. When was the last time a 38-year-old man made fun of you because you opened up to him,
Could I please drop this like 30-year memory that is like hasn't played out in 20 years, definitely, you know.
Right.
It's crazy how long that stuff just like sticks around for.
I mean, it's interesting you say that. In terms of, I was listening to someone give a presentation actually like this weekend, and it was around trauma and how communication helps with trauma. Any sort of communication. It could be an action, it could be words, it could be, hugging each other, whatever it is. As long as there's a communication aspect, the body and the brain starts to condition itself and starts to make sense of what happened, even if it was traumatic. So I think what you're saying is the first step of just getting past it. But when you do, like talking about it now, like you sharing that little piece, which is not under the surface yet, there's a lot more there, right, to unpack. But this is already, I can see it, even your face and the way your eyes and everything. You're like, now, if one were to ask you a question, I would say that you would be more inclined to share more about. And that sharing, it really opens to the healing. And it's really amazing. And this person was talking about war zone areas where he has visited, where people have so much trauma, and how does he cut through all of that? And it was fascinating. So I thought of that when you were sharing. So this is really powerful stuff.
One of the things that I would love to touch on, just as it relates to this sense of community and what you're building, is to invite you to share a little bit. You and I have talked about it a little, but the idea of your community having impact elsewhere, and thinking about this group of people not just as support for your family, but going out and kind of have this broader vision of what a community could really be. I would love to hear you share some of that with us.
So that is like the ultimate end result, is when you can get a group of families and kids to go and build. I think that's the vision. But in building up to that, so the things we do locally is, so one of our good friends, she's the executive director of an organization that works with refugees that are coming from overseas and being oriented to the Atlanta area. So Missy, before, in college years, she was really involved in that work as a college student. So we kind of connected with that organization, and, we take our kids there, we meet these other families with kids, and we make baskets of things that they need, like it's like ISEC orientation, but for refugees. So people set up their homes, apartments, and then we do care packages for these families. Obviously through, the Girl Scouts, they engage with all the local charity organizations and not-for-profits in the area where they volunteer their time. In terms of other meaningful things, like so our mosque, our masjid, I'm involved in. So one of the projects we're doing is creating a community space, community center, and a place of worship. But it's the first one in the world to be regenerative. So regenerative building. So in terms of how do we give back more than we take, that concept, and we are in the process of starting that construction. So and the city, the local municipality, the city officials, like everyone is coming together to support it. So now we're trying to figure out how do we launch this initiative and get wider recognition and support. And we're working with for example, the Candida building in Georgia Tech. They're like a advisor. So kind of connecting and partnering with different people, and the brothers, I guess the men, the fathers, as we were saying, we on our own haven't done much in terms of giving time and resources to the larger community. But as a family, all of us, we have done those types of engagements. But I think the next step is, and I think it's interesting, as men in that age, I feel like we have a lot of blocks in terms of how do we, as a group, give back. And this is this thing we're trying to figure out. So right now we're doing a retreat for men, which is coming up in like a couple of months, where we're going to come together and kind of understand how, as men, how do we partner together, and have younger people coming like in their teenage years and doing programming, like more of like a conference, but it's in the wilderness type of camping type of thing, and trying to, more difficult. I think in the whole family construct is easier, and that's how we have been connecting and giving back to the community.
So I think we always like to end with this question, which is, what advice do you have for any future dads or folks that are getting ready to be a dad?
I think there's layers. So one fundamental thing in terms of knowing your values and really spending time to understand what they are. And my hope is that you connect it to something bigger than yourself. So even for the agnostic or the one that is still searching for, I don't want to say guidance because there's a negative connotation, but searching for something, and to have that concept. In terms of the life partner piece, I think it's obviously there has to be a sense of attraction, may it be through emotional, intellectual, physical, and a combination of that. But I would say to acknowledge it and also put it to the shelf, if you will, for a second, to say, how would that person be a dad? In our case, be a mother to your children. And I think that is the question that we should answer, because ultimately 99% of people getting married, if they can physically, would like to have children. That's my assumption. But I think so. If that is something we want, to have kids, we should think about that. And number 3 is to have very small weddings and buy very inexpensive rings. I mean, I tell you this, I didn't do the research, but I think in terms of the people I've met in my life, in terms of happiness and contentment, with the amount of money they spent is a opposite negative correlation between the two. And I would say this about me, is that I had a very small wedding, like my religious wedding. It was at my parents' home with maybe 7 to 8 people. And, Islamically, it's like a contract. Every marriage agreement is a contract. But it's a funny story. So it's like, you have to give a gift to your wife. And typically it's like, a reasonable amount of money. And, Missy, new to this concept, and I'm also, in my 20s, like, so she was like, oh, just $1, is the gift. So I think from that, it's just amazing, where you end up from where you started. I think that is, I know it's funny, but it is such an important thing. Even if you have the means or your family is supporting you to have a grand ball, please fight the urge to not do it. I think it will pay dividends in the future, God willing.
Thank you to Izaz for an excellent episode. We had a couple technical difficulties during that one, so hopefully the tech team can work all that out in post-production. Couple things that I wanted to flag for the folks listening. And the big thing to me was Izaz's penchant for being extremely intentional on the values that he lives his life with, how he chose his partner and what really mattered to him. And then how he created his community. I spend a lot of time being appreciative of the community that I have, and I spend a lot of time thinking about men who might not have that. And hopefully this provides a resource to get started, making sure that the life and the environment around you is how you want it to be. So I loved hearing from Izaz on that. There's definitely more to talk about with him when he comes back, but I think there's a lot for folks to chew on in that regard in this episode here.
Yeah, I think for me, a couple of the big things that stood out. The first, I'll echo one of the things you said, was I was blown away by his own work, his internal personal work to identify and then live by a core set of values. I walked away from that part of the conversation totally inspired to continue that work for myself and also figure out how to support that work with more people. It's just, if we all had more clarity and confidence in that kind of core foundation, what lives would we live? So I was really inspired by that. And also the second big thing is I was so struck because today, at least in so many of my circles, the narrative is so strongly anti-religious for so many reasons. And it was so fascinating and in many ways inspiring to hear Izaz's perspective on the good that comes from a life centered on faith. And I know that, that is going to be something that I'm going to be thinking a lot about for myself. It's kind of opened up, this question of religion or spirituality, its role, not just for myself, but for my family and for the broader community in a way that I'm going to be spending a lot of time thinking about. So I thought that was also fascinating.
Yeah, and hopefully if you don't resonate with the religious flavor of it, the principles are still very applicable. It doesn't have to be through a religious screen that you apply this. So I hope that doesn't create a blockage for anyone. If I had to choose between the two camps, I'm probably closer to that camp, and I still can see plenty of ways that I can use these ideas. So I hope we can kind of have this in a positive light, regardless of what your orientation might be. So thank you, and we will see you folks on the next episode coming at you. Before you bounce, I have a quick favor. Please subscribe to the pod. Not only does Luke love juicing those numbers, but it really does help put this thing in front of more dads.
And Mike, on the other hand, just loves juicing. We also now run a listener community on WhatsApp. To join, visit dadpod.fm, and you'll see the delicious link at the top of the homepage.
Come on in, baby. We'd love to have you.